While everyone is, I'll let everyone type. While you do that, I'm going to go ahead and flip over to the next slide, which is PDF via InDesign. Okay, any questions on the FrameMaker piece? There was a lot of stuff there. All right, we will have some time at the end, so we can come back to that if we need to. InDesign produces just beautiful typography. There's some really nice stuff going on in there. The text looks good. If you're a font snob, you can probably tell the difference on a piece of paper between something that was done in InDesign versus something that was done in FrameMaker versus something that was, God forbid, laid out in Word. It is lovely. You can tweak it to adjust the pagination. You can control your page breaks. You can do what you need to do there. The downside to InDesign is that there is no default out-of-the-box support for DITA, or not really even for XML. There's sort of support for XML, but certainly not for DITA. Extensive configuration is required to get the DITA content into InDesign. And again, we have white space issues where FrameMaker gives you something that kind of has some weird spaces in it. InDesign can actually fail to import the file if you use white space that InDesign is not happy with. So there's a really, really serious problem with white space to address. The process for getting stuff out of DITA and into InDesign looks like this. You're going to take your DITA content and you're going to run an XSL transformation, quite a large one, against it to turn it into InDesign-friendly XML. And what that means is, among other things, is that you're going to flatten the map file. Instead of having a map file, like a FrameMaker book, that points to other components, you're going to look at the map file and resolve all of those components such that you have a single, very large XML file with all of your content in it. You're going to resolve and flatten content references, or conrefs. So anytime you have reused text, reusable text objects, you're going to basically embed those. So think of a graphic imported by reference. You're going to copy all those graphics to where they need to go. You're going to need to modify the structure of images and tables to accommodate what InDesign considers to be a reasonable structure for images and tables. You need to do something about the white space. And you're going to need to do something about cross-references. InDesign is not at all happy with the cross-references that come in from DITA. So there are some issues there, and that actually has to be addressed on the InDesign side with InDesign scripting. So the first 4 sub-bullets that I have here would typically be done in XSLT. The 5th one, the cross-references, has to be done inside InDesign using the InDesign scripting language, which is non-trivial to learn. You're going to need a template in InDesign. So you're going to go into InDesign and you're going to set up a template file. Now the good part of this is, if you're familiar with InDesign, setting up a template is not that difficult. And then once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and import the modified XML into InDesign. So again, I'm going to drop out of my presentation here and switch over to InDesign, and we're going to take a look at this. So the process is actually not particularly interesting. We're going to open up our template file here. So I have created a template file. It's got some organization to it, but there's nothing sort of particularly interesting going on in here. And then if you look at, for example, the list of paragraph styles, you'll see various kinds of paragraph styles in here that more or less map across to what you have in DITA, like a P tag. And a code block, but in many cases we made, for example, title 1, 2, 3, and you don't have title 1, 2, 3 in DITA. You can modify these, so you could, for example, double-click the P tag and then specify what you want to do here. So again, we can take our favorite example here and go in and say we want the character color for this to be red. Once you make these changes, or once you have your template configured to your satisfaction, you'll notice there's a structure view over here. It's actually empty at the moment, but it sort of retains the root element for reasons that I don't fully understand. You go to the File menu, you say Import XML. It's going to give you some options here. I am now choosing hacking preprocess.xml. This file has been run through a preprocessor. It's been run through the flattening process. So what I'm pulling in here is not really DITA anymore. It's a different kind of modified XML. And I'm going to say open. There's some choices here, nothing particularly interesting going on, and it's going to bring it in. I will say that InDesign is actually extremely good for things like a cookbook with repeating pages where every page is the same. It will do that quite nicely. But what we're showing here then is the input that you get from, again, that same Hacking the DITA Open Toolkit content. It brought in my P tags, and it did turn them red as requested. I have something here called, I think, abstract, which outputs that blue and various other things. And it did bring it in and lay it out in the way that I wanted it. So it looks kind of reasonable. I would clearly have to do some additional work here to get it to look exactly the way I want it to. But, you know, it looks, shall we say, adequate. And you could, of course, get to a point where this looks quite nice. It did bring in a table correctly, which I know this doesn't sound like a major accomplishment, but it really is, considering what you go through to get tables to work in this application. So most of the work in DITA, most of the work in InDesign is going to be up front in flattening out the XML such that you produce something that is going to work for you. All right. I'm going to mosey back over here, and I see there are some questions coming in, which we'll take a look at in a second. So the issues that you're going to run into with InDesign are a huge amount of pre-processing, lots and lots of XSL processing that needs to happen there. It is not technically impossible to round trip, but we recommend against it. If you really need to round trip, do it in FrameMaker. And you already heard about how we don't like round tripping in FrameMaker. Round tripping in InDesign, I would think, would be just a mistake. It's a huge, enormous challenge. I would take it as a personally interesting kind of challenge, but I don't really view it as a useful way to spend anybody's money. Authoring. You cannot legitimately author structured content in InDesign. It does give you a structure pane, which has a superficial similarity to what you do in FrameMaker, but believe me when I tell you that it is not, in fact, a structured authoring environment. It is not good. And again, white space. So white space is an issue. We stripped all the white space before we brought it in, and it behaved pretty well, but white space in InDesign is a really serious kind of problem. Okay, so are there questions there? I see one in here, which is what is generally used as the XML authoring application and PDF HTML generation engine to support DITA for small to medium-sized companies. I'm going to assume that when you say small to medium-sized, what you're referring to is an organization that has perhaps fewer than 20 writers or content creators. And I think the general answer, and Simon, feel free to jump in here if you want, but I would say that the general answer is going to be probably one of two things. Option A would be, and probably the more common one, would be either XMetal or Oxygen as your authoring environment and publishing through FrameMaker. And option B would be FrameMaker-based authoring. I think those are the two that you're going to see most commonly for a DITA kind of environment. And Simon, what would you say?
Right. No, that's exactly what I was thinking. The other thing I was thinking is that, of course, with XMetal, there's a bunch of different levels to the platform. And in addition to Enterprise, there's XMetal Author. And so what you can do is